after a full and busy day. So I'm going to invite us to take a few cleansing breaths together to help us center ourselves so that we are fully present, and as much as possible to let go of some of the things on our minds that are weighing us down and that might prevent us from being fully present in this space and with each other. So join me, breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. Our chalice lighting, if you have a chalice, I invite you to get it now and light it. If you don't, you're welcome to light a virtual chalice, or if you happen to have one on your phone, this is the time to do that. And our chalice lighting words come from Amanda Gorman, who many of us met for the first time during President Biden's inauguration in her wonderful inaugural poem, as the youngest ever poet to create a poem for that occasion. This is from a recent book of hers, Call Us What We Carry. And this is an excerpt from a poem called Augury, or the Birds. The only way to correctly predict the future is to pave it, is to brave it. The breakage is where we begin. The rupture is for remembering. That is to say, here is where we hold our heart. We inaugurate our dreams at the injury. We consecrate at the cut, under the suture of the sun. We sense ourselves stir, slowly, sweetly, as if for the first time. This nearly tore us apart. Yes, indeed. It tears us to start. May it be so. May these hearings be a start as we work to repair our democracy, cherish our democracy, and work for the changes that are needed to prevent something like this happening again. I wanted to remind us too of our UU theology and values as we come to this moment. Of course, what's center in my mind right now is the use of the democratic process and the sacredness of that process, and a process that depends on all of us honoring the rule of law and the fact that no one is above that law. Also, building a world of peace that's fair and free, and where justice is for everyone. And of course, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, that guides us in our work in this democracy, in our agreements and in our disagreements. The worth and dignity of each person, no matter who they are, where they come from, what their background is, what their race, ethnicity, economic status. And we hope that we are guided in our deliberations and the committee's deliberations in the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. That's not only a free search, but a responsible one. And that makes all the difference in the world and makes our ability to disagree respectfully important. And of course, all of this is framed by the eighth principle that we are considering, and many of congregations and UU organizations have adopted, that we're working to build a beloved community, a diverse, multicultural community, not just by saying it, but by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. I hope our time together will open our minds and hearts, and that we'll be able to share what we're thinking, and that it may guide us and give us sustenance in the days and weeks ahead. I also want to remind us to be gentle with ourselves and to practice good self-care. We've all been through a lot these last 3 years. This last week or two has been particularly traumatic, with gun violence as well as other things that are going on in our lives. So to practice good self-care, there may be things we hear that trigger trauma that we've experienced in the past. Please take care of yourself. And if you need to step away or turn off your video, take a break, please do so. We only can minister to others when we take care of ourselves. And finally, we do this work in community and with each other. This is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And so leadership takes breaks, we pass off leadership, we do what we can when we can and find the small things that we can do. So welcome again, and so good to be with all of you this evening.
Thank you, Reverend Karen. So now I want to just give a little bit of framing, and then I'm going to pass it over or open the floor to our Democracy Action team to talk about some of the work that they're striving to do. But I just want to remind folks that our at UUSJ, at least, our recent journey to this moment started with the previous presidential election. Our Democracy Action team was involved in that, like so many of us, through UU the Vote. And then in late November and December, they leaned into, well, how do we hold this newly elected bunch of folks accountable in the legislative context? And they began by talking about the issues of free and fair elections. And we all throughout that first year leaned into the issues of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act, or S1 and S4. Sorry, those are the titles that I remember. And we were all working alongside other faith groups to get Congress to pass and update the Freedom to Vote Act and what eventually became the John R. Lewis Act, which combined S1 and S4. And it was really an intersection, sort of an integrated whole approach to updates and improvements that we needed in order to retain free and fair elections and protect against some of the voter suppression activity that was already beginning to creep up at the state level. And we worked really hard on that. And many of us, myself included, believe that Senator Manchin and perhaps Senator Sinema were engaging in some peacocking and trying to showcase their importance and their pivotal role in the Senate, but that when everything came to its final head, as it often does on Capitol Hill, they would vote with the members of their party and the sitting president and pass needed legislation. And that vote didn't come to a head until January of this past year. And while they were interested in the policy, they were not interested in the changes to decision-making process that would allow them to implement the policy. So In the first round of voting, there was support, and then in the second round of voting, both Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema declined to change the filibuster rules in order to get the vote passed. And since that moment, folks like myself and others and our action team of volunteers have been scratching their heads, wondering, well, what is Congress going to do in order to preserve our democracy? In the interim, we had January 6th, where we had a real significant manifestation prior to that vote of the discord in our country around the issues of voting and the narrative of how the vote worked. So after January, we had the pleasure of having Representative Donna Howard out of Texas talk to us, talk to UUs in a very specific way about what this looked like on the ground. And I see that Reverend Aaron is in the gallery with us. She's the executive director of the UU Justice Ministry of Texas and does wonderful work down there. And we had a conversation about when state legislatures are actively engaged in suppressing the vote and essentially disenfranchising people, what does that look like? Because part of being inclusive in our approach to democracy is being aware of what's going on. Well, in the interim, the other thing that happened is members of Congress started to think about, well, if we can't do the integrated whole elements bound up in S1 and S4, what else can we do? What else should we do? And there seems to be some bipartisan agreement that the Electoral Count Act needs to be updated so that the sense that the vice president has some leeway to interpret results differently than what the state electors are sending to the Capitol is quashed, is addressed, that to make sure it's very clear that it's a ceremonial and other things. And so UUSJ is working, has been working since about February on the Electoral Count Act. And with that, I'm going to invite anybody from our electoral count, our democracy action team to talk a little bit about what we're gearing up to do in July. Does anybody from the team want to speak to what we're thinking about doing?
David, if you want to take this on, that would be great. I know that you're quite familiar with many of these issues. What we're speaking to generally is trying to take on some reform efforts with respect to one of the most important pieces of legislation that you all have never heard about, for the most part, I'm guessing, which is the Electoral Count Act. I know I hadn't heard about it up until about a year and a half ago. It's technical, it's antiquated, and it needs to get changed, and it needs to get changed in this Congress, which of course is going into recess in August. We need to roll up our sleeves and do some work on this one. David, can you tell us what it is that we're thinking about doing in terms of reform here?
Sure. Yes, it always seemed like the electoral count, which takes place in Congress on January 6th, it's in the Constitution, was always just kind of a ceremonial thing. We all kind of ignored it because we assumed, the result of the election was announced the night or the day after the election occurred, and we all knew who had won. Well, suddenly, this January 6th, it was not so routine, and it was viewed as an opportunity to try to overturn the results of the election. And there were those who were pressing then President Trump to use it to question those results. And the way they would do that is to say, well, yeah, there are slates of electors that have come from these 7 states, battleground states, but there are also alternative slates of electors, which they had managed to gin up in various ways. And so they believe that the Vice President, Mike Pence, could make a determination either that the original slates of electors, which reflected the actual popular vote, were bad for one reason or another because of alleged fraud and could throw them out, or that instead of choosing the new slate of electors, the phony electors, these could all be set aside, and neither of the candidates then would have gotten a majority of electors, which the Constitution says is the test for who becomes president. And in that instance, the Constitution says the contest goes to the House of Representatives to decide who will be president. And in the House of Representatives, it's decided by state delegations, not by individual votes of representatives. It's a kind of a crazy thing. So it was clear to many people. Fortunately, that failed. There were enough people of principle on both sides of the aisle to prevent that from occurring, and the election was properly certified for Biden. But it certainly opened everybody's eyes to the possibility that this could happen again, and indeed is likely to happen again if things aren't legislatively clarified. This Electoral Count Act was enacted in 1887 after the Tilden Hayes controversy. The language is archaic, hard to understand, and has a lot of ambiguities and is really subject to manipulation. So soon after that happened, a bipartisan group of senators and also a bipartisan group in the House started working on these issues. Everybody's focused on the Senate because the House, we can assume will pass a reasonable amendments to the act. The key is the Senate because it takes 60 votes there. So you do need to have at least 10 Republicans who will vote for changes. And
another crazy day. You're a CIO in 2022, but you're covered with security that protects your company everywhere, on premise.
Somebody needs to mute.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Right now, there's a group of 17 senators who are a bipartisan group who are working on it. We've spoken to a number of the key offices. We spoke with Senator Collins, chief staffer, on this, and we are planning in July to go back and with more refined points, because we sort of have been watching how things have been going. There are a number of things that really need to be done. The role of the vice president needs to be clarified, that it's a purely ceremonial role of counting the votes, not deciding whether particular electoral votes are proper or not. Right now, all it takes to object to a particular slate of electors coming from a particular state is one member of the House and one member of the Senate. And, if you were watching on January 6th, you remember that that happened with regard to a couple of states, and that halted the counting of the votes at about the same time that the mob started to enter the Capitol. Now that should be raised, and we just got some good news today. CBS is reporting, and I'm hoping this is correct, and this is apparently from Senator Collins's office, that the group of 17 has agreed in principle to general changes, and they would include clarifying the role of the vice president, and also raising the number of members who have to object to have a creditable objection to 20% of each body. And that would be a great improvement. They would also apparently enable funds from an existing source of money to go to protecting poll workers, which is really important because there's been a lot of threats and intimidation. So those are all good, but there's some other things that need to be done. We need to clarify that Congress has only a very limited role on January 6th, and that disputes about whether a state has properly conducted an election should be decided by the courts, not by Congress. Congress is simply too partisan. You'll remember that the courts did a very good job in handling these lawsuits based on claims of fraud this time. There were some 60 lawsuits. They were all thrown out. is baseless. So I think we can trust the courts, and we need Congress to clarify that the courts are the proper body to determine whether elections have been properly run in particular states. There are a few other things that need to be done. So we're going to be working on those issues in July, and you'll have a chance to write in to your senator on these things. So we just need to keep pushing to get as many of these glitches resolved as we can.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that. I'm looking for my own tile here so I can spotlight myself. So yeah, I'm just on the programmatic side of that. I'll just share with folks in the coming weeks. You'll see emails, you'll see links in our UUSJ outlets inviting you to write your senators on this topic. We'll provide for you a synthesis of the talking points that David has just laid out. And we'll need as many UUs as possible to weigh in with their senators. And then there'll be a smaller set of folks who are invited to try and engage their senators, because their senators are key on this issue. We will be pursuing those meetings. So if you want to help us get the meeting by letting us use your name, you let us know. We'll be happy to include you in our pitch for the offices, and we will certainly inform folks via email when we get those meetings. Now I'm watching the countdown clock, and just to remind folks, you know, when the session starts, I will share my screen and we will watch together. We're gonna try and be attentive listeners. We can share comments in the chat. If you want to make a comment, try to do so when the hearing speakers are not going themselves, sort of dovetail what they're saying. The best way to do that is to go to the bottom of your dialog box and to raise your electronic hand using the reactions tile. So for example, you can do it like that. And you can lower your hand. If your household is like mine, you might have extraneous noise in the background. I have a 6.5-year-old running around with my wife getting ready for bed. So I'm going to keep myself on mute. If I'm not actively speaking, I ask you to do so as well. But again, this event was conceived as a space for us to have fellowship and community as we watch the hearing, which is going to be the first public reveal of this select committee's findings. And a lot of us are nervous about what they're going to be saying and what they're willing to say. I will share, I was deeply disappointed with the select committee that they didn't get to this point sooner. I keep on looking at the clock here and at the timetable with regard to elections, and feel as if they should have been more vociferous in engaging their work and making sure that their findings were rolling out on a timetable that could help make sure that our next election is not unduly influenced by the issues that they are looking at. So we'll see. Maybe they have good reasons for having stuck to the timetable that they live by. I understand that, you know, there might be a political track, and then there's perhaps an alternative legal track that is centered on what the Department of Justice can do. I'm going to be listening for what they have to say about that. And just wondering to myself, how bipartisan is this concern going to be? I know that I hear from UUs who are Republicans and Democrats, Libertarians, and other parties, and everybody that I hear from seems to be concerned about this. And I'm wondering if that's going to be reflected in the concerns of the members of Congress. You know, there's been a lot of coverage about what is going to be the role of Liz Cheney. I always mispronounce her last name. So, I'm gonna let Donna just hold space and talk to you while I make sure that the hearing is pulled up.
Sure, thanks, Pablo. So again, glad that you're joining us tonight. I think we might have a few more folks who rolled in, including Reverend Lisa from my own home state of North Carolina. Thanks for joining, Reverend Lisa. Glad you all could be here with us tonight. I think that one of the things we're going to probably see come out of this is the kind of orchestration that was behind this January 6th. What we're left with in terms of images, in terms of the kind of feel of that day, was an act of terrible political violence. What we may not be as familiar with are all of the moving pieces for the weeks prior to that, and even in the weeks following. Texas, I'm sure you're quite familiar with the role of your AG, the use of the legal system to try to bring suit with respect to other states and their election laws. There were a number of tactics used, and I hope to tune into the hearing to find out more about what all of the different parts were. We know that we can do through UUSJ. UUSJ, of course, is an organization, as many of you are familiar with, that focuses on federal level legislation. And so our moment of opportunity really is in the next few weeks to be able to hopefully move forward, to visit some additional offices, to do what we can to move the message forward that the Electoral Count Act needs reform. The Electoral Count Act, as David Shilton explained earlier, was what opened the door to the kinds of abuses that we saw politically and that we saw legally being set up in addition to the act of political violence.
Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the committee in recess at any point. Pursuant to House Deposition Authority Regulation